Welcome to another episode of Framlingham College in Conversation. We're excited to bring you a new series of podcasts focused in blowing the EDI space wide open. We've asked members of our community to send in questions for our pupils, which we can then put to experts to stimulate discussion. While we will be posting lots of questions with the prefix "is it okay to," we're not here to tell you what you can or cannot think. That is very much up to you. What we want to do is raise awareness and perhaps encourage healthy debate and a chance to think critically around these issues. After all, that is what education is all about. To that end, we may put across some ideas and opinions you may disagree with, and that is your prerogative. But we do ask you to approach it all with an open mind. In this episode, we're going to be talking about sexism, a rather broad spectrum word in this case, with Paula DeVaux. We've worked with Paula in the past, and she's spoken to our pupils about sexism, domestic violence, and she works to facilitate positive change in this field. Welcome, Paula.
Good morning, thank you.
We're also joined by Ollie and Mimi from the school, who will put the questions to Paula that have been sent from various members of the community. So,
can you call a postman or a postman even though they may be a woman?
Yeah, I've had post person. That's quite hard to say, but yeah.
Make sexist jokes in the workplace because they are harmless fun.
No.
Is it okay to hire someone just because they are a boy or a girl?
Yes, if it's critical to their job performance.
Is it okay to say don't be an old woman?
No.
Is it okay to say go back to the kitchen?
No. Jamie Oliver, maybe? Gordon Ramsay?
Are women equal to men now?
No, sadly not. Not enough.
Is it okay to say that boys are the only ones who can lift something heavy?
No.
Is it okay to say boys will be boys?
No. It's justification for all sorts of terrible things.
Is a man going to be accused of being misogynistic if he walks on the outside of a pavement whilst walking with a woman?
No.
Is it okay to pay the bill on your first date if you're a guy?
Yes, but ask. I think the importance is always about consent. It's always about asking, would that be okay with you?
Is it okay to hold the door open for a girl if you are the opposite sex?
Yes. Open the door to everybody.
Call a man a girl for a laugh?
No.
If a man and a woman reach the door together, who should go through first?
I think paper, scissors, stones.
That's very efficient.
Or an arm wrestle.
Say lads.
No.
Is chivalry dead in the era of equality?
No. There's space.
Man up. To say man up.
No.
Is it okay to call out a colleague on a Greg Wallace style question?
Yes.
Is it okay to call a boy a big girl, meaning girls are softer?
No.
To tell someone not to be like a girl?
No.
Is it okay to not want to play rugby with a girl?
Oh, it's an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah.
So like mixed teams? Is that what it means?
I guess so.
We have lots of mixed teams, don't we? Mixed netball, mixed rugby.
I don't really to not want to play rugby with girls, so it's a boy thing, and that's that.
No.
Why is it okay for a woman to call a man sweetheart or darling, but not for a man to do the same for a woman?
Is it okay though?
I don't know,
I don't know
yeah.
if I would call a man sweetheart or darling.
No.
If it wasn't a relationship situation.
Is it okay to make fun of an alpha male stereotype?
Yes. It depends on the context and who you're with.
Is it okay to disagree with Birmingham Council's retrospective awards for gender pay equality, which are bankrupting current and future council taxpayers in Birmingham?
It's interesting because we've all got different opinions, haven't we? We might disagree. That's okay. It's about how we express that, how we communicate that. And we're not always going to agree on everything. So there may well be people that disagree It's interesting, the pay gap, really interesting, isn't it? And there are some stats I was reading up yesterday, actually, interestingly, about the pay gap. And I made a note because the top two industries in terms of, work, construction, finance and insurance, the pay gap for men and women remains 22% is the pay gap. So it's very real. When we talk about equality, have we reached equality? Clearly not. The pay gap still exists. And within teaching, this is really interesting. So 75% of teachers are women. Yeah, we know that they're disproportionate in terms of the gender balance. Yet the pay gap is 20.4%. So there are more women teaching. And lots of people would argue that women then have more power in that teaching arena. But if that was the case, then women would be paying themselves more, not less, wouldn't they? So that kind of shows the power imbalance there and the pay gap.
But why is there a pay gap?
Yeah, good question.
But like, because then you need to, state reasoning for doing something.
Yeah. I mean, it's the Office of National Statistics that these statistics come from. And organisations have to submit a true reflection of their pay scales. So they can't hide, they can't lie. That has to be a true reflection of what's going on. But whether they then have to justify why that is, I really don't know. But it should be, shouldn't it?
Might search it up.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing to look at. But that's the key. If you hear something you're not happy about, you have a look at it and ask why, rather than just accept it. Because acceptance, that silence is acceptance. And if we just accept, well, it's always been that way, things will never change.
Is it okay to say girls are better at some things?
We can say someone is better at something, but we need to be careful about how relevant is the gender attached to the skill. So, lots of people will assume girls are better, boys are better at this and this. But actually, does that mean all girls or all boys? So I think for me, that starting point is about asking yourself when you're thinking about that, or if you're saying something out loud, think to yourself, how useful is that to assume that applies to then all girls and all boys? That's a lot of people, isn't it, that are then assumed to be good at that particular skill.
But if you say that, if you want to take it from an individual perspective, then as you said, there's so many different people and that's so many individuals. So how are you meant to judge if you've just met someone or you're stating a scientific fact? Because often it can go down to biology of if a girl's better at a certain task. I'm sure there's countless sort of examples and experiments where this has been said. But if you're going to say that, you've got to, in some ways, put it as a general, because otherwise it's too individual. And how are you meant to then go forward and sort of approach an individual about that if you haven't got the overall consensus of what it would be?
Society provides us, forces us, it kind of shoves in our faces a lot of stereotypes around gender. And there's a lot of expectations attached to that and assumptions that we can make just by walking into the room with somebody based on what we see. So what we need to be thinking is, how helpful is that? And what impact does that have on the individual that you're then assuming has these traits because of their gender? And then it goes into lots of discussion, doesn't it, about the kind of pressures that we might feel, the impact and the pressures we might feel if we are not particularly good at those assumed things. Where does that leave us in terms of identity? So that's quite a wobble for somebody on the receiving end of that assumption, isn't it?
But for it to be a stereotype, it obviously, to have gathered momentum to be a stereotype, it would have had to be, there must have been evidence for that across, many years for it to become a stereotype. But if there was if it's a scientific fact that there is something in which they are naturally better at, then it is with science.
Are you thinking about physicality difference? Because that, I guess, is scientifically, there are differences in physicality.
That could be one example, but I'm thinking more mental. Often, if I've got this right, I'm pretty sure girls are quite better at multitasking compared to boys.
There are lots of assumptions and there are lots of kind of ongoing jokes, I guess, about multitasking and who's better at doing that, women or men. I don't know about the scientific evidence base of that, But, there is a bit of an ongoing joke, isn't there, that, for women, we absolutely multitask. But there are lots of men that would say, hang on a second, actually, I'm better at doing that than my partner is, or my wife, or my girlfriend, or any of those. So it's interesting, isn't it? And also it's about dynamics in a relationship and what your strengths are as a team. Fundamentally, that's what it's about. And if we have conversations about just the gender and partners being in a heterosexual relationship, for example, then we're really in that conversation, we're excluding many, many, many individuals that wouldn't necessarily put themselves in a neat little gender box. That actually we're talking about inclusivity, we're talking about inclusive language, and we're talking about same-sex relationships, transgender, so many communities that would be ostracised from those conversations if we're always talking in that traditional way.
When it comes to gender, I think it's really important as we're moving to a more, controversially woke environment and world, which is good and may be seen as bad in some ways. So when it comes to gender, people may identify as maybe not, I'm a boy and I'm a girl.
Yeah. So we've got non-binary, transgender.
Where do they fit into that?
The stereotype.
Yeah, because if we're saying, is it okay to say girls are better at some things? Biologically, you may be seen as a girl from your body, but you may not feel like that,
Absolutely.
yada, yada, yada. So I think it's important to, when you talk about gender, there are so many different now ways to kind of see gender. And is gender how you feel? Is gender physically, like who you are? And it's just, when it comes to thinking about the workspace, when it comes to being maybe a female CEO in a work, for example, typically you need to have more of a masculine way about, like the way you go about things. So as a female, can you have it all? Can you have that going home and having children and being able to have that part if that's what you want? And then can you can you run a big business? But when it comes to physically as a female, there are so many different things biologically that you must go through if that's where you want to be. So having children, for example, at 30, you may have a business by then, whatever, but you're like, I do still want to have kids. Where do you able to balance that? Because a male, you can have children, but you're not carrying the child. You can have children, but then some women, after they have children, their whole body, like their whole life changes. So when it comes to the workspace in gender, it's very difficult to say kind of a woman can do everything, whereas a man in a workspace may feel like they can do everything, because you can kind of have a career from a younger age and carry on with that to a certain extent, whereas biologically, if you want to do the whole, if you want to be a mom and if you want to do and properly be good at that, if that's really what you feel like you want to, can you be the masculine CEO and command a room and get things done, which is what a masculine energy may say? Do you know what I mean? Yeah,
there's so much there, isn't there? And I think you've touched upon some really important points about gender difference, about society's expectations, about judgments that people make, about the heavy load that women carry, and usually an invisible load as well for those that are working, as well as trying to have a family and be hands-on with everything. So it's one big guilt trip. And I can say that because I'm juggling both being a mother and being having a career. And it's not easy. It's not easy at all. And all the time, there's this kind of constant level of guilt, I think, of what you're not doing or what you are doing. You can never quite get it right. And how the world perceives you if you put your career first. And, certainly I've worked within the criminal justice system for over 20 years. And there are lots of female lawyers that I've worked with that have had children and returned to work within 3 weeks of giving birth. because they had to, because they were driven, because they were all of those things. And who else knows circumstances as to why? But there was a choice there of coming back within that period. Lots of conversation being had by people around, peers, judging. Oh, that's 3 weeks. That's early, isn't it? What about breastfeeding? What about this? What about... So all the time, that person, very unfairly, is being judged, but probably judging themselves. But we never know someone's personal circumstances. But the world tells us what we should be. We should be all things. And right now, that makes it really hard. So for me, I had my son when I was 36. And I was already then classed as an older mum, which was a really weird conversation to have with a midwife. And it was like, you know, being an older mother. And they kept saying this. And I was thinking, wow, this is interesting, isn't it? But I made a choice to have a child later. We made a choice as a couple because we didn't want to rush into things. We didn't want to feel like we'd missed out on stuff, or we didn't want to be in a financial position. We wanted to, you know, have a good house to live in and have a good foundation, all of those things. But when you do that the right way, you then end up being judged as you're older. You know, what's wrong with you? You know, there's lots of those kind of questions as well. And people often asking you, when are you going to have a baby? You know, you've been married all these years. Why? When? So my husband and I have been married 17 years and our son is 8. So there was a long time that it was just us. But that's okay. That's good. There's no rush. But I felt like there was a pressure on me that I had to, there was some reason. I was also in a management position within the National Probation Service. So I had a lot of responsibility and was kind of earmarked, if you like, as being very driven, which I've always been, very driven, very focused, very career focused, wanting to do well, assertive, very outspoken, confident. Some of those may well be assumed to be more masculine traits, which is interesting because certainly as a child, being outspoken, being competitive, opinionated, strong-minded, confident to speak out, that's always been me. That's always just been the basis of me. I've been very sporty. I've always been physically strong. When I was younger, much, you know, stronger than a lot of my peers as young boys, primary, secondary school. But then I was labelled at that time as a tomboy. So that's not a term that we would use now. But it didn't mean I wanted to be a boy. I just wanted to be a strong female. And that's what I've evolved into. And I'm very proud of that. But certainly over the years, you know, the labels that men particularly would have associated to them, maybe in this sort of CEO type situation you're talking about, or in a boardroom, it would come across or be assumed or interpreted as wanting to be more masculine, to be stronger and more dominant. Actually, it's about being assertive. So I think, you know, the stereotypes around being strong and, you know, confident and outspoken and all of those things are really interesting because certainly that's what I've experienced in my, you know, growing up, because from very early stages, I was always very confident and outspoken and my mum was very quiet and the opposite. So it's really interesting to see how that comes through in terms of nurture and nature. And there were times where, oftentimes my mum used to say to me, oh, Paula, I don't know where you get that from. And we'd have a bit of a joke about it. Or she'd say, just don't say anything, you know, we'll just let it go. Whereas I'm not the person to let it go. If somebody's rude, if something happens, I'm the voice. I'm the person I've always been the person to stand up and say something. And that's what's important about these kind of conversations around, if you see something, say something. If it makes you uncomfortable, it's probably going to make someone else feel uncomfortable. What we need to do is really start to question these stereotypes that we've inherited. And you mentioned earlier about what, you know, this must be coming from somewhere, you know, the traditional stuff, the misogynistic underpinning of lots of expectations and a sense of entitlement. All of that is born out of these very traditional pair of shoes, if you like, of what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman. But actually that doesn't really fit in today's society. And we need to evolve. And we can't evolve unless we critically reflect, we question, we have these chats, these conversations, Because all of those questions, that are filtered through about, is this okay? Is it okay to say this or do that? Yes, some of them are quite simple, basic questions, but actually they are really important questions that really pave the way then for the bigger stuff of, gender and equality and misogyny and sexism and the impact it has on all of us, because it affects all of us, and language is everything. So there's lots of questions there.
Yeah, there are, and I think what's fascinating talking about stereotypes is stereotypes are pretty unhelpful, as we've shown, but it's fascinating to see to what extent in society different genders play to those stereotypes, and there's just a sort of an interesting concept I came across in recently called weaponized incompetence, which is this idea. Ollie's smiling because I think I talked about it in a lesson recently. this idea that for example, if I'm at home and I don't know how to cook something, or I don't know how to clean the oven, or whatever it might be, I might say, well, I don't know how to do that, which sort of gets me off the hook. And you're weaponizing your incompetence. You're getting out of doing a chore or a task or something that's perhaps seen as unmasculine because you don't know how to do it. But ironically, we live in the world of YouTube, and if you don't know how to do it, you can learn how to do it. And that's quite interesting in terms of what we talked about earlier about these gender roles. I think those lines are being increasingly blurred between what men and women do or what society expects of them, although there seems to still be a kind of hangover from these age-old stereotypes that often sort of give us social pressure, if you will, to behave in a certain way. And I think exactly what you're saying there, Paula, what we're asking people to do is think critically about the stereotypes and challenge them, because that's really what life should be about. And I think also the other thing that from listening to all of this that's interesting is that society seems profoundly judgmental in this age. I mean, that's not to say it hasn't always been, but if people judge people all the time, as you were saying about being a woman, having a child, going back to work, if you go back too early or you go back too late or whatever it might be, you're constantly being judged. Well, why? It's your life. You make your choices. Why should anyone have an opinion or judge you on that? That's not okay, I think.
I think education, being educated on what's going on in the world, is so vital. I think it's very clear in conversations that I may have with girls and boys. As a woman, it is quite petrifying, actually, really petrifying, thinking about the world, and even walking alone to my car and it's Framlingham. I'm like, okay, whereas a male typically wouldn't feel that. And if you aren't, as a male, educated on how hard and how scary typically the world may be for a woman, because violence against women and men, but in a relationship, domestic, all these different things, is quite petrifying. And the point of you may see the world in a negative light because of your job, I think that you're just very educated. Yeah. It's not you making up stories. Facts are facts. It's not you painting a picture of the world that's super negative. If you aren't educated and you aren't reading about things that may be happening in the world, are you at fault? Are you not able, are you not educated enough? Because being educated about what's going on, I believe, is such an important part of life, because we can all float around this school, and we are in Framlingham, and we can float around and everything's good, and we've got my A-levels, all these different things. But this is only a bubble for a small amount of time. And when you're living in a maybe bigger place, London, for example, where hopefully I'll be in a few years, it's a very big worry. Okay, I'm going to London. Okay, so I'll be living in a probably not the best place. I'm a student, let's be honest. Mm-hmm. Is that safe? Can someone get into my house? That's the things I'm thinking about. And I haven't even got there yet.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe for a male, it's not that. And going out anywhere, whether that's going to a club, whether it's going to the pub, anywhere, it's a constant thing. So
It's quite exhausting, isn't it? Because you're thinking about your safety now. You're thinking already about your safety ahead. And they're all of the risk assessments that we make as women. And there's a male privilege there that often, I mean, for men, you know, you guys, there are lots of things that you can do that you probably wouldn't give a second thought to, but we do. So an example of that would be exercising outside, particularly in the dark. So these winter months, you know, it's dark in the morning, it's dark, you know, by 4. So Adidas did a really interesting study actually, and their research showed that 92% of women said that they felt unsafe to exercise outside, so that they chose not to. Whereas men, absolutely, there see lots and lots of men running at any time. You've got 24/7 gyms. Think about the percentage of women that use those in the middle of the night, because you've got the power to do so much good.
Yeah,
and if we all harnessed that, if we all did that, if we all were in a social setting where somebody said something we felt uncomfortable about, and we said, actually, do you know what? I didn't really think that was very funny. It made me feel a bit uncomfortable. That would get the whole table stopping. If I said that, they'd go, ugh. But as a man, you could say that and have more of a voice than me.
But what's the alternative? Do nothing, right? So do nothing, nothing happens, things don't change. So the point is, all movements in history start somewhere. They might start with one voice, and then you have this ripple effect. So those 10 people at the dinner party, okay, let's say only 2 of them pass it on, but that's 2. Then it creates a groundswell, and actually that's how change does happen. So, and I think Paula's point about using male privilege, increasingly it seems there needs to be more male voices fighting for women, and going back to the point about you know, a night out, for example, it would be fascinating to poll parents who have both a girl and a boy, how they felt about their girl going out till 2 a.m. versus their boy going out till 2 a.m, and what the pitfalls and worries were. They might worry about the boy being beaten up, but they might worry about the girl being raped. You know, there's some pretty serious implications of that. And I think the other thing that would be fascinating is to sort of kind of do a role play of the thoughts going through a girl's mind when they go on a night out versus the thoughts of a boy's mind going on a night out, because I think you would find pretty clearly that it's a very different lived experience in the same town, in the same planet.
Just the way that you see the world, the way that you live your life, and that's not your fault. That's fine. That's not, you know, these are not privileges. Male privilege is not something that people, you know, men necessarily asked for. I'm conscious, you know, my son, he's AIDS, and, you know, he has privileges already just by being a boy. But it's about helping him, like we said about education, helping him have awareness of the lack of that for females and an insight into that. What we want is empathy. We want empathy where men have the lens, they try to look through the lens of a woman's life, and in turn that then would create more safety. And what happens is actually that kind of empathy will come through once a man has a daughter. Up until that point, you could say to men, well, you know, what about violence? What about violence against women and girls? Lots of men will say, well, it's not all men. And absolutely, it's not all men. Of course, we know that. But if, as a man, as a boy in this world, if you are not trying to challenge each other with these kind of jokes that come out, or the comments, or, you know, these microaggressions that we see of whistling, jeering at women walking down the street, you know, all of that still happens. If we don't empower boys and men to challenge each other, then arguably those boys and men that are very positive in this world and don't have a sense of entitlement or exploitation, but in this absence of challenge, that silence is acceptance. And surely that then contributes to the problem that we've got. So as an individual, you know, this isn't a woman's it's not a women's issue, it's a man's issue. And it can only really be effectively changed by men. That's the crux of it. Because we can have a voice, and I've got a voice, and I often have comments of like, what about men? And I'm not saying that men don't matter. Of course they do. Men matter to me. I've got really important men in my life that matter to me hugely. And I want a safe space for men, women, everyone to be able to communicate and have healthy relationships and dialogues and feel safe in their world. But what we need more than anything is for boys and men to have more empathy and understanding of the dangers in the world for women and girls, to create safe spaces. So, there are small things that can be done, small changes. And I know it sounds to you like, it would be an ideal world. These little things don't make a big difference. But I would say to you, they really do. They absolutely do. And language is everything. Just adjusting language or questioning language is really effective. Asking somebody, what made you say it in that way? That's interesting. The way that language is used is really informative. It's really impactful. It's really powerful. And it's often used with intent with those that want to sort of dismiss, diminish, belittle people. And it's important that we stand up and we're heard when we feel uncomfortable or we're not happy about somebody being treated or spoken to in that way. It doesn't matter about gender. It's just about being a decent person and showing respect to each other.
It's really interesting. I grew up, I'm one of 4 boys, and I grew up in Oxford and London, both pretty full-on cities. And I had I've got a strong mother. And if I was on a night out, if I was walking back on a night out, I'd have my wits about me because I was worried I might get knifed or beaten up. So I spent my life in London crossing the road. So if I saw a male walking towards me on the same side of the road, I would cross the road. But equally, if I saw a female walking towards me, I would cross the road so she didn't feel intimidated by my presence, because I felt like I kind of understood their fear.
That's exactly what we need.
And that was really, well. I don't know why I did that. I genuinely don't know why I did it, but I always did it.
Well, it sounds like you've just reflected on having a strong mother.
Yeah.
And there's beliefs and attitudes there that have been, passed down to you through observation, through learning and teaching, that actually there is an empathy there for women. Yeah. Not all men do that. There are men that would go and sit next to somebody on a bus, even though there are loads of spare seats everywhere else, just to intimidate, or to sit behind you and breathe down your neck. Oh. That happens. On the tube. There was a guy, we went to the races, and how busy it is, like at the bar, and so a very bustly bar, and I'd gone to get some drinks, and it was really busy. And absolutely, that personal space is going to be tricky in those kind of situations. But there was a guy behind me who was literally bumping into me on purpose. And the difference, don't you? And he was so close the whole time. And I kept trying to shift and shuffle. And literally, he was right there, pressed against me. And in the end, I turned around and I said to him, look, hold on a second. This is just too much now and you need to back away. And he was going, what? And got all like Neanderthal with me. And then he called me a feminist bitch. And I said, I don't know why that has come into your head. I just don't want you rubbing against me. Yeah. And if you get any closer, you're going to need a condom. So you need to back off. And then the guys he was with all burst out laughing. So it turned into this joke. But actually, it was really uncomfortable. Yeah. And I'm in a position where I can be, confident and I can speak. But what about those that can't? Yeah. There are lots of women that experience those kind of experiences all the time on the tube, probably a daily, weekly occurrence for many who just put it down to one of those things. Actually, it shouldn't be. Mm. And what really needed to happen was one of his mates going to him, that's not okay. Yeah. Yeah. Instead of laughing about it and, made him into a bit of a joke. Mm. That's not all right, is it? And wouldn't it be interesting how their reaction would be if that was one of their daughters or their wife?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that could make a big impact. If you then tut or put your stuff on the thing and, you know, you push it up and you shimmy them along, they feel rushed, they feel a bit robbed actually, a bit shortchanged from the interaction that was probably their only for that day. Yeah. So having the awareness of a female in the street walking on their own and you maybe being a bit closer to them, as a male, absolutely having that awareness of crossing the road or stepping away, slowing your pace down so that that gap is widened. If it's on a bus, you know, there's a big issue about how, certainly when you look at how men sit in social spaces. So this is interesting. There was some research that was done about it, about how men take up more physical space in the world and what is that about. And females on trains and tubes all have talked about situations where they've felt uncomfortable or intimidated. So think about, you know, when you're on a bus or you're looking at, you know, a waiting room, have a look at the space that's taken up by women and by men, and the whole choosing where you sit thing as well. So there might be lots of empty seats, yet a particular guy will choose to sit right near a female when there's loads more space. There's intent behind that. And it's intentional to intimidate. And that's a worry, isn't it, in the world? Because you think, why? Why do that? But there are people in this world that want to intimidate, and it's a power thing.
So can I ask a question there?
Yes.
Oh, this is one of the questions that has been put to us. So say, for example, obviously I totally understand your point about a man sitting next to someone with an intent to intimidate. I get that. What if, and this is one of our questions, you know, is it okay if you walk onto a train, you see a girl that as a male you perceive to be beautiful, and you choose to sit next to them because you want to start an exchange with them, talk to them, get to know them, because, I don't know, you've just fallen in love with them in the spur of the moment. Is that okay? Or is that not okay? Because you hear, you know, you hear stories of that. You know, that's how I met my husband because he chatted me up on a train or whatever. So is that okay or is that not okay?
So that's about social interaction and the rules around that, isn't it? And that kind of feeds into personal space and awareness. You know, it's nice to connect. It's nice to chat to people. And I do that a lot. I talk to strangers a lot. And my son sees that, and that's a nice thing because it shows confidence and respectful interaction. In that scenario, it's more about, sometimes it's the non-verbal stuff, isn't it? So if you smile at somebody, that's a nice, warm, friendly way to greet someone, isn't it? Even if you don't know them, that's okay. If they smile back, then you kind of read the room, don't you? Yeah. You read their body language. So if, for example, in that scenario, you get on the train, you see someone, you think, wow, I've fallen in love in seconds. I blame Disney and movie love for that. That doesn't mean that person fell in love with you in seconds. So, you know, you need to be aware that they might be thinking something very different to you. Yeah. So, you know, your needs are not the most important. And it's important to then have read the room awareness. That's where empathy comes in, isn't it? And reading body language. We say a lot without saying anything. So if that person folds their body and they kind of turn, that's a wall. That's a no thanks.
That's a no. Yeah.
If they don't smile back, that's quite a key, isn't it?
Yeah.
That if they give a nervous smile, we all know what that is. That kind of half, hi, bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
They're not feeling it. So it's
Be
awareness.
Smart.
You've got, and also don't override it with this token resistance assumption.
Because I can. So
There are lots of movies that show this token resistance, particularly for women. You know, oh no, I don't want to kiss you, no. And it's if you push them hard enough, then they'll go for it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Because women are taught very early doors not to be easy, not to be too available. Yeah. You know, and the assumptions and judgments that are made on that. And then, you know, what were we watching the other day? Rocky. The first Rocky was on, and we were watching that. And I love the Rocky films. And there's a bit at the beginning where there's the awkward exchange between him and Adrian. And eventually, you know, they get together, and that's lovely. But she's very awkward. She's very uncomfortable. And she keeps saying to him, no. And he still keeps coming to where she works and visiting her. And I was thinking, this is getting a bit uncomfortable because she's saying no, but he won't accept that. But it actually turns out to be this really romantic ending. But the way he kisses her for the first time, he literally just pins her to the corner of the room and he kisses her. And she says, no, I don't want to. And then she does. So it gives very mixed messages. Those kind of scenarios give very mixed messages about what's okay and how far do you push? Where's the grey area? But on the train, that scenario, keep it simple. And that's for me something I really want to drive is about self-care. I said earlier, didn't I, the worrying stats around mental health, well-being, suicide rates for young men. And it's a worry, it's a real worry, because what we need to do is show compassion and self-care. And that starts with us. And then we show that to others, nurturing and taking that time to be safe in who we are and express ourselves in a safe way, but also then to be able to communicate how we really feel rather than feel that we need to suppress it because the world tells us that's not what you should be doing or feeling. So I think, all of those things are really important to me. And being a voice, addressing that behaviour that you see or hear. And again, that's not a gender specific thing, that's for everybody. Being able to be that lone voice can sometimes be really uncomfortable. But actually, if you feel that instinct and you feel uncomfortable, even on someone else's behalf, you can say, actually, I'm not really sure if that is what you meant. Did you mean it to come out like that? Or that's an interesting way to look at things. That's not the way I saw it. What about other people? And then if you see someone brave enough to do that, because it can feel like quite a brave act to stand up and say, no, that's not okay, stand next to that person. Because it's important to have strength, isn't it? And can you imagine if you stood up to somebody and then somebody else came and stood next to you and said, I agree with them? It would make you feel supported and not that lone voice, wouldn't it? So there are things there, particularly that would benefit women and girls if men did those very simple things. So there are some messages there that really jump out for me, I think, that we've kind of touched upon, but I really wanted just to bring forward.
No, thank you, Paula. So yeah, that's a wrap. Thank you, Paula. Thanks, Mimi. Thanks, Ollie. I think we've had a really fruitful, interesting discussion, which will throw up lots of thoughts and ideas, some of which you may agree with, some of which you may not agree with, but hopefully we've aired some interesting and profound discussion points.